Hi everyone and welcome. In this special recording, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming Pluto retrograde season of 2020 and what this can mean for us personally, but also collectively. Now, this year's Pluto retrograde is going to begin on the 27th of April and it's going to last until the 6th of October, so it's going to be quite a long period of time until we embody the symbolism of the Pluto retrograde. Now, before I begin, I would just like to say a few words about Pluto and its symbolism. Now, as you know, in mythology, Pluto is the god of the underworld, Hades, so to speak. So, its symbolism has much to do with transformation, with destruction, with alchemy, but also throughout the years, as astrologers started to study Pluto and its symbolism, very many other elements and manifestations were contributed to Pluto. For example, Pluto is a very karmic planet. It has a great deal of influence in the course of fate. It can trigger very many destined, fated events, also endings. Pluto specializes on endings because endings ultimately give way. They free up space in our lives, in our karma, in our minds or hearts, regardless of which area of our lives. They free up space for something new to enter our lives. So basically, it is a big transformation, just as death is ultimately a big transformation where we make the journey from one state to a totally new state, even a new dimension, so to speak. So that's why the symbolism of Pluto is so very relevant regarding any kind of transformation, evolution, mutation, and change in general. And because of its transformative powers, it's also associated with alchemy, because alchemy is basically inner transformation, inner change. So exactly when Pluto is in retrograde position, when its symbolism turns inwards, it has much to do with our inner transformation. But ultimately, Pluto is the higher octave of the planet Mars, so it has much to do with power, it has much to do with control. Its shadow expression is maybe abuse of power, manipulation, obsessions, excessive power. So very many different things are attributed to Pluto. Now, also, Pluto is a very slow moving planet, so when it enters the sign, it takes about 20 years or more for it to make a full transit, but each and every time when Pluto touches a sign, a certain part of the sky, it transforms it profoundly. For example, because I think that how the symbolism of Pluto plays out in a specific sign is much more clear and understandable to exemplify it. So in the 80s, especially the mid 80s, Pluto entered its home sign of Scorpio. Now, Scorpio has much to do with sexuality, with secrets, with hidden desires. So, what could we witness playing out on the world stage in the 80s? Well, the rise of the AIDS virus, an AIDS pandemic, so to speak, which at first kind of affected the world silently in the shadows, hiddenly. It had much to do with hidden desires, secret sexual intercourses, so to speak, because the world, human collective, wasn't that open in that moment of time to unusual sexual behavior and activities. So that is how Pluto changed our sexual behaviors profoundly. It opened us up to very many new things. It opened us up not to judge certain sexual behavior, sexual minority, and etc. Now, when Pluto was in the sign of Sagittarius, now its symbolism highlighted the negative expression of religious fanaticism. That is when a lot of conflicts, a lot of global turmoil, fear, hysteria, very many negative emotions were triggered by acts of religious fanaticism, by religious intolerance, but the sign of Sagittarius has also much to do with law and justice, so we could see this playing out in our legal systems. The legislation, the constitutions of many countries were upgraded in order for them to reflect a totally new reality. That is the moment when political correctness and non-discrimination became so important and became so relevant for all of us. And basically, yes, the practicality, the applicability of equality has much to do with other signs, but the philosophy of it, the basic principles, have much to do with the sign of Sagittarius. So that is how we can see Pluto totally transforming and altering a part of the sky which it touches. And right now, it is in the sign of Capricorn, and it has been there for quite a long time, and that is why we see all these protests. That is why we see all these moments of uprising, the financial crisis, the political crisis, and all of these crisis situations have been ongoing for quite some time now. So yes, they had quieter moments, but the principles, the ideological battles were non-stop. They were still ongoing, and most importantly, what Pluto is actually doing in the sign of Capricorn, it is exposing flaws, it is exposing the weaknesses, the corruption, the shadow agenda, the abuse of power, the unfairness of our political systems, of our social structures, of centralized power, so to speak. So that's why Pluto, which has so much to do with secrets as well, because it rules Scorpio, is exposing and birthing so many conspiracy theories, so many different versions of reality, how people relate to and react to centralized power and all its rules and regulations. And ultimately, Pluto in Capricorn represents the power of the people who are challenging it, who are transforming it, who desire change, who desire to step into a totally different future where society is based on true equality, where centralized power actually respects the principle that they're just representatives of the will of many people and not tyrants, not dictators, and stuff like that. Now, also, it must be mentioned the power of Pluto as it played out at the time of the conjunction of Pluto and Saturn, which was taking place in the 12th of January 2020. And for many astrologers, it was that conjunction, that very rare meeting of Pluto and Saturn, which caused the coronavirus from an astrological perspective. Now, this celestial dance is actually very rare because it only took place in this format, so to speak, 500 years ago approximately, and it coincided with the time of the Protestant reformist movement, when Luther Martin challenged the institution of the Pope, which is the symbol of centralized power, that religion and our connections with the divinity, with God, so to speak, are not susceptible to an intermediary. We don't need anyone in our lives for us to interpret and understand what the message of the Bible and the message of God, the divine message, is for us personally. So we eliminated the intermediaries, at least those people who joined the Protestant movement. So that was a massive revolutionary expression of Pluto's energy at that moment, because it changed the world profoundly. Yes, the ideas, the philosophies, the discussions, the theoretic part of this has been ongoing, but it was still the meeting of Saturn and Pluto in the sign of Capricorn which detonated this karmic bomb, and all of a sudden the power of the Pope, centralized power, was bestowed on the people, because if you don't need an intermediary, if you don't need a cleric to tell you what the Bible has to mean for you, so that is surrendering control, so to speak, well, then you're much freer. You have a greater degree of freedom in your lives, and of course, it also affected the finances and the material situation of the world, because they stated that paying for the forgiveness of sins and paying for this and that religiously, paying for spirituality, was ludicrous, was unacceptable. It was a unholy principle, so to speak. So it really, really challenged centralized power. So now, after the present moment conjunction of Saturn and Pluto took place on the 12th of January, well, our centralized power, our version of what centralized power actually is, we can already see it transforming, being deconstructed profoundly by the coronavirus and all of its other implications, the financial implications, the social implications, and most importantly, what the social distancing is doing to people internally, because they are getting back their powers. They're awakening from their slumber, so to speak, from a moral perspective, from a spiritual perspective, even from a psychological perspective, because it's waking them up to a totally different reality that, yes, they have worked a lot and they have had to make compromises to respect all the rules and regulations of centralized power in order to have a prosperous and good life, but they sacrificed precious moments of their life, their liberty, their soul level desire, so to speak. So they enslaved themselves. They became modern day slaves, and they're waking up to this reality, and even the simple fact that you become aware of it is already enough for a powerful change to take place. Now, back in January, the 12th of January, Mercury also met in the sky at the time of the big conjunction. He also met with Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, and it represents the nourishment, our relations to food. And we can already see her symbolism playing out, where she met Pluto in the sky, because many people are already fearing that all of this is also going to lead us to a great agricultural crisis, famine, so to speak, a potential, the risk or danger of famine. And ultimately, this will represent the need to revolutionize, upgrade, transform even our agricultural practices, how we feed the nation, so to speak. So, Ceres in this celestial conversation had a very profound symbolism, especially that it marked a totally new cycle we are going to have, as in relations to our food, what we consume, what we use as nourishment, because Ceres is Demetra, so to speak. So this reminds us of the legend of Persephone, as she was abducted, so to speak, by Hades with the pomegranate seeds. So whenever Persephone left the side of her mother Demetra, Demetra fell into a deep depression, and that's how the world descends into winter. That's how the ancients explained the seasons and the cycles. And yes, it is just a philosophical symbolism, but still, there's so much truth to it, because if we abuse our source of nourishment, nature, Mother Nature, if we use our Plutonian energy too much on her, which is genetic mutation, which is controlling her, suffocating her, well, then chances are that she's gonna react to this. And when Mother Nature falls into a depression, as we could have seen with the Amazon rainforest fires, the Australian fires, all the big natural calamities, and the weird way animals started to behave all over the planet, including my own culture, my own town, where in 2019 bears just went berserk and started to jump in front of cars, trains, suiciding basically. So that was a massive wake-up call that we need to stop our abuse of power. We need to stop our influence in an abusive way, which we have on Mother Nature, trying to control her in order to gain resources. So all of these examples serve to better understand what Pluto is and how its symbolism can play out in our lives. Now, another very important symbolism, which is attributed to Pluto by more a modern take on astrology, is money. Because how can the planet of death and transformation have much to do with money? Well, if Pluto is power, and if Pluto is in the sign of Capricorn, well, then most of our powers in this modern era is our financial situation, is money. And ultimately, this is also what Pluto is deconstructing, how we should share resources, how we should share money to have more equality and more compassion when sharing money. Because, yes, if we the principles of equality and what you deserve actually into extremes, then of course some people on the planet don't deserve an income because that's the way of life they have chosen for themselves. But this is where we're invited to be wiser than that. We are being invited to embody our true human natures, where we might not really care that some people get free benefits, because ultimately the biggest value, the biggest worth is our lives. It is not just human life, but the life of every single sentient being on the planet. And this is the power of Aquarius. This is why, and on the 21st of December 2020, Saturn and Jupiter are going to be meeting in 0 degrees of Aquarius, the Great Conjunction, which is giving, it is like the tuning fork for the next 20 years of our lives, which has to be based on authentic humanitarianism and compassion and an equality, a philosophic equality between people, where on one hand, yes, we have to be more stricter to what we allow in our society to exist, but at the same time, we have to use a totally new, revolutionary set of judgment skills, how we judge what should and shouldn't be allowed. Because if being compassionate, being permissive to those people who have a really limited intellect, and there's nothing they can do about it, because it isn't your fault that you were born with a limited intellect, that you have a certain set of genes, that you suffered a certain type of education. You're not totally responsible in a human way for your own fate. So we have to be more gentler and understanding with these people. So we shouldn't actually be limiting them that much, and we shouldn't make their lives a bigger hell than it already is, because then if those people turn to criminal activities and promote intolerance and hatred into the world, can we truly be surprised? Because our own rigid rules and intolerance was the cause, psychologically at least. So all of this Plutonian activity, along with the Great Conjunction in the 0 degrees of Aquarius in 21st of December 2020, is contributing to a massive social, political, moral, ultimately financial upgrade, so to speak, where Uranus transiting the sign of Taurus, another fellow Earth sign, which represent the rules, traditions, the rigidity of our value systems, of what we hold as worth, as valuable. Uranus in this part of the sky, where Uranus represents the revolutionary energy, the future, the highest possible expression of our intellects, our understanding, our knowledge, science. It is revolutionizing our value systems, so it is a perfectly complementary energy and symbolism. Now, this is what Pluto is contributing towards. This is why Pluto is such a massive and important power player on whatever is going on the world stage and wherever we're headed in our futures as a human collective. So Pluto is definitely a very, very important planet, a very, very important astrological power that is helping us shape and form our futures and break free from the past, may it be even the collective past, the history, the unhealthy patterns of human collective. Now, when a planet goes retrograde, it means that first of all it stops in the sky, and the moment when it stops in the sky, before it goes retrograde, it means that it's that much closer to our planet, so its symbolism is greatly amplified, and then it will start its retrograde movement, going back on the track it took the planet to get to where it is right now. But of course, all of this is symbolic because in physical reality, in astronomy, a planet never retrograde doesn't exist. The planet never changes its movement. It's always following the same patterns. Yes, it is an optical illusion, but it's this optical illusion, so to speak, is highly symbolic, and the energies of the planet are definitely changing and altering, meaning that it's not only it is turning inwards, so we are embodying the symbolism of that planet psychologically, but also by going back, it is completing something that was left unfinished at the time when it was direct. Especially Pluto retrograde is not just very important from a psychological perspective, but it's also very important in regards to fated events or the playing out of karma, so to speak, because if anything was left unfinished, if everything was left untransformed, then chances are, during a retrograde, all of those things are going to find completion. Now, why is a Pluto retrograde so significant? First of all, collectively, it's highly significant because of the present moment global turmoil, the crisis, the coronavirus outbreak, and the economic disaster side of things, because on the 26th of April, Pluto is going to stop in the sky and is going to be stationary retrograde. Now, this is a moment when its symbolism is greatly amplified, and in the sign of Capricorn, it represents abuse of power, definitely. That may be a moment in time when the governments, when centralized power, make their rules and regulations stricter, and it may not have to do with the limitations that much, because Saturn rules the limitations, but Pluto, basically, what they require from us. It can also represent a big injustice where we don't get what we deserve, where they break their promises, where they just enforce certain kind of rules upon us. As I said before, it may not have to do that much with restrictions, with the limitations, but something totally different. And at the same time, it can also represent lies, it can also represent corruption, it can represent abuse of power, as in manipulation, as in deception, as in hiding stuff from us, withholding very important information that we are entitled to. It can also represent not respecting human rights, not respecting their own legislation. It can play out in very many different ways, but most of them are going to be rather unpleasant for us individually, because Pluto stationary retrograde in the sign of Capricorn, joined by Jupiter, is definitely abuse of power, no matter how we look at it. Now, that is exactly why, after it goes officially retrograde, the 26th to the 28th, we can see a very strong reaction from people, from citizens. This is definitely the energy of uprising, revolution, protests, and simply people claiming back their powers. People withdrawing, for example, all their money from the banks, from the institutions, people changing their normal behaviors, people simply being totally disillusioned, losing all faith in the centralized power, in the competence of the politicians and the professionals, because Capricorn is also every single professional, relevant professional, which is part of this big picture, maybe the doctors, scientists, and all that. So people are definitely going to withdraw their support, each and every one for different personal reasons, but deception, lies, withholding essential and life-changing information from the public is definitely one of the symbolisms of how this Pluto retrograde is going to play out as soon as it takes place. And this is where things can run out of control. This is where chaos can descend onto the symbolism of Capricorn, as I said, centralized power mostly, and professionals. And the ongoing square it holds with Eris, goddess of discord, can trigger powerful protests, oppositions from the people, and revolutions. So we can expect uneasy, restless times to enter our lives. No matter how we look at this, it's still going to affect us. Now, personally, the symbolism of Pluto retrograde might not be all doom and gloom and chaos, because it's a really beautiful energy for some people. Because Pluto has power, so it retrograding, it means that we finally get the chance to reclaim our powers, to have control over our lives, to go within and seek truth. Relevant psychological truth, where we can look at our own behaviors and what we project onto others in a very objective manner. And this gives us the chance to change. This gives us power over our subconscious, power over our instincts, power over our mental spheres, whatever we to express, whatever action we choose to take, whatever we choose to project upon other people. And this is all. Pluto is also the planet of psychoanalysis, because it's like a celestial surgeon. It goes straight to the weak point, to the vulnerability, to the trauma, and it helps us see that. It is a very revelatory energy. So by becoming aware, by being able, having the guts, the courage to confront the truth, that already changes us. That's why Pluto is associated with really powerful inner change. And especially Pluto retrograde, when we have certain things which we have to 100% eliminate from our lives, let's say a toxic relationship, bad habits, addictions, our own bad psychological patterns, our own corrupted cycles, so to speak, our obsessions, our unhealthy behaviors, our unhealthy desires, done maybe our judgments. It can represent so many different things, because Capricorn also represents our own inner structures. It represents our own rules and regulations which come from within. So, on one hand, it can also be our sense of self worth, but from a very material perspective, not so much philosophically. It can also represent our routines, because that is the application of our own rules and regulations, the power which we have over our lives. It can also represent our compromises, whatever we accept, the power that other people have over our lives that we accept or we agree to. So Pluto retrograde can be really good energy for purges, to terminate unhealthy relationships, compromises, to become that much freer. And of course, it's a really good energy for psychology. May it be self-psychoanalysis, may it be turning to a professional, it doesn't matter, because it empowers you to accept the truth, to see the truth, and to change, to do whatever you need to do in order to break up the old routines and patterns. And this is why Pluto is a very powerful and helpful transformative energy, because after it eliminates something, Pluto is also associated with regeneration, with rebirth, resurrection. And speaking about resurrection, Pluto retrograde is very an opportune energy to resume something that we have abandoned in the past. For example, to resurrect an old dream of ours, to resurrect an old ambition, goal of ours, to resume a profession we abandoned, to resume a project or work or whatever, go back to a company that we have abandoned in the past. So it's not just transformation for the future, it can also be a revival, a resurrection of everything that is old, but it is still valuable to us, but we had to abandon it for various different personal reasons. It's really good energy to recall the past, but usually the positive aspects of the past. like something that which gave us pleasure, something which gave us power, satisfaction, so to speak. So it's really, really good for various different inner activities. And at the same time, Pluto is also the planet associated with the occult, with mysticism, with parapsychology, with the occult, the supernatural, the paranormal. Yes, on one hand, Neptune has much to do with all of these, but Neptune is very highly spiritual. It doesn't necessarily mean manifested, but Pluto, it represents the infusion of divine powers into our physical reality, which affect it, which transform it, which manifest power of karma, power of faith, fated events, so to speak. So a Pluto retrograde is really positive for all these things, because if the symbolism turns inwards, it heightens, it emphasizes all our supernatural, so to speak, abilities, like the sixth sense. It is when the veil between the worlds is a little bit thinner than usual, because all of us are embodying Pluto, so all of us are basically portals to the other side, portals to whatever the supernatural means for you personally. This is where we get curious, where we like researching, investigating, desiring to decipher mysteries, get to the bottom of enigmas. So that this is really good for magic, magical practices. It's really good to accept the loss of dear ones, especially those losses which provoked a serious and heavy trauma. This is a moment when we can find acceptance, when we can find forgiveness, when we can just release the past, eliminate it from our souls, from our subconscious. So the Pluto retrograde is really, really useful for very many different reasons. And another very important aspect which I forgot to mention is that one of the effects this Pluto retrograde of 2020 is going to have is most definitely freeing people from their social slavery. This is when illusions all of a sudden lose all their importance. This is when we no longer feel genuine love and attraction for luxury items, for certain values that we know that are not healthy, that we know that are just illusions and make believe. This is when we rather dive into our own fantasies, our own imagination, rather than to consume those of others, like movies, like fiction, like computer games, like addictions and escapism. This is where we attribute this power to our minds and to our own beings, which means we no longer have the need to be consumers of social media and entertainment, of TV, of everything that is so relevant still in our lives right now. This is also when we no longer accept to be slaves for a certain amount of money, because we have the realization, the epiphany, that yes, we may get money, we get the power of Pluto to give us whatever we want, but at the same time we sacrifice life, we sacrifice soul, we sacrifice wisdom, we sacrifice beautiful life experiences. So this is the moment when we realize that other people in our lives obsessively needing us. Yes, it can be honey for the ego because you're important, you're a VIP in the lives of many, but at the same time it's enslaving you, it is poisoning your soul. So for many people this will be an invitation to have moments of solitude, but not solitude as in social distancing, but true soul level spiritual and psychological solitude, where you simply block out social media and the internet and everything like that. You just stay with yourself and the divine ultimately. Now, to close this article, I'm going to highlight the most relevant and important aspects that Pluto is going to be forming all throughout its retrograde season. So the very first aspect starts in May, where it forms a sextile with Neptune. Neptune is in his home of Pisces, So it's really, really powerful and significant there because it represents spirituality, it represents the power of faith, it represents emotional power and emotional clarity, and the sextile it receives from Pluto, well, basically, it amplifies our magic powers, it amplifies our spiritual practices, our faithfulness and devotion to spirituality, to our own souls. It is a really good psychological aspect where it purges you, where it restores your faith in yourself, where you can fight off traumas, unhealthy patterns from the past. It is a really wonderful aspect for artists because this represents the power of self expression. Very powerful, very relevant, and significant inner journeys are going to be made. It's a really good spiritual aspect where whatever you dream of, whatever you fantasize about, whatever you deeply believe in, has that greater chance to manifest in physical reality, because Pluto, after all, is in Capricorn, the sign of manifestation, the sign of the physical earth, the rules and regulations which govern the physical earth. And in May, Saturn is still in Aquarius, so that means a greater power to manifest whatever you think of, whatever you create in your mental sphere, but also in the depth of your core, your divine spark. Your fantasies can all of a sudden become reality. Now, Pluto also receives a beautiful trine, also in May, from Mercury in Taurus, and this is a really good aspect for money, for finances, for financial regeneration. People who have had many losses, people who have had moments of poverty, of scarcity. This can just promote the flow of material energies, the flow of values. It can help you find out the most ingenious ways to attract money into your life, to fix your finances, to pay off debt, to eliminate material obligations from your life, to regenerate, to recover financially and materially, to make important purchases which are essential for your existence. And of course, later on, Pluto retrograde is also going to receive a trine from the Sun in Taurus, and this is really a beautiful energy because this can trigger fated events materially, financially, regarding your worth, regarding your self-worth, regarding finances, values, acquisitions. You can attract help in your life, like sponsors. It can help you if you're really good at something, especially if you're an artistic person. It can help you just shine and blaze and attract admirers, attract people who value you, who find your work or whatever you do really beneficial for their lives, and this can also create a state of flow. But since the sun is the main luminary, it can also reveal secrets. It can also reveal hidden, deeply rooted psychological subconscious patterns which might have been an obstacle all your life without you even knowing it. This is where whatever you attract subconsciously becomes that much obvious, that much clearer. You become aware and you have power over it. So this is a really good aspect as well. And this is also a really good sexual aspect because Taurus is ruled by Venus. So it has also much to do with physical pleasure, worth as in the small joys of life, and it can also be a really healing energy sexually, where you might just come into terms with just how attractive you really are, and all those events, elements, whatever in your past and in your life which make you seem unattractive can be eliminated. There's an also powerful sextile in mid-June which Pluto holds with Neptune conjunct Mars in the sign of Pisces. This now, if the previous sextile with just Neptune was a big spiritual power infusion, now when Mars joins the picture, because Mars is the lower octave of Pluto, so when these two meet in conversations of harmony as in a sextile, it represents power, it represents faith manifested, it represents your fantasies, your dreams, your deep soul level desires manifesting before your very eyes. Fated events, fated key events in your life which can trigger chains of manifestation which simply guide you into your future or living your deepest fantasy. This is a big infusion of spiritual power. And then at the end of June, on the 30th, I think, Jupiter retrograde conjunct Pluto in the sky, and this is also very powerful energy because if Pluto retrograde on its own represents inner truth, well then when the planet of truth itself is dancing together with Pluto, well then that represents a moment of big clarity, big truth, both for us personally, but also collectively. Now personally, Jupiter retrograde meeting Pluto retrograde in the sky is a really, really powerful energy. This is when, who we are as in human beings, who we are as part of human collective, as part of society, as part of the human physical world, may it be professional, may it be any kind of role that we embody in physical reality, as in the material side of the human collective. Now that will become that much more obvious to us. So for those people who are searching and who have been searching for a very long time what their true calling is, what their true role is, what they truly love deep inside their hearts, who they are as souls and whatever, this is a perfect aspect for all those people. And for others who already discovered it, who are already embodying it, well, this energy is a massive blessing because it reveals to you and it gives you that 100% certainty that you're on the right path. While for some, it will highlight that they're not on the right path and it will show them what the right path truly is. Collectively, however, now this is where things are going to be a little bit delicate because Jupiter retrograde represents that the power of truth is also inward. So it represents that people are going to be much more receptive to interpreting physical reality and what they see in the world their own personal unique ways, which represents also that they are going to reject what is given to them. So this is going to be a moment when everyone decides what is going on in the world for themselves, and when that moment when people reach a very powerful conclusion personally and they share their knowledge with others, now that can be a massive game changer. I'm not going to analyze this much further because you can make up your mind, you can tell what that means when big collective truths come to the surface, but in a way when people are more subjective than ever to interpreting them in their own unique ways. So if there was a ketone to chaos, well, this is definitely it. But this chaos is really, really good, really, really significant because it invites us to embody our inner truth and what all of this means for us personally, and that represents also action. Now in July, Pluto is going to form oppositions with the Sun in Cancer and with Mercury in Cancer. And this, when two planets oppose each other, their symbolism reaches a certain type of equilibrium, but Pluto is the dominant power here. So neither the Sun or Mercury have any chance against Pluto. So this represents that the truth is going to sink in emotionally, and it has much to do with our families, the place we live in, our communities, our collectives. The Sun in Cancer is a very, very compassionate energy. So this gives us a totally different reason why we need to embody the truth, because it also affects our families, our immediate communities, all those people who we love, all those people who we belong to, who are part of our lives, our ancestral heritage, so to speak. So we are doing all of this not just for ourselves, but for other people, for those who we truly love, for those who we want in our lives, for our ancestors, for the legacy our ancestors have left us, for our inheritance. a culture perspective, of course, not physical inheritance. So this is a really powerful energy because it's going to be a massive game changer, because all of the big changes that Pluto retrograde is already provoking inside of us, this will have an emotional, a deeply psychological connotation as well, because Cancer, after all, is the sign of the nurturer. It is the sign of the carer, of the sign of the support, the light worker, so to speak. So definitely, this is going to have spiritual, psychological, and moral, emotional repercussions as well. This is where we will have the tendency to protect those who we love and to express our truth to them, forming an even greater bond and alliance with all those people who we love. And this might also lead to clashes, because Pluto opposing Mercury is big truth from an emotional perspective. Now in August, it is Venus's turn to oppose Pluto retrograde, because Venus is going to be in the sign of Cancer. So this will be a massive emotional revolution, so to speak. This is where our unhealthy emotional patterns which might have to do with matters of the heart, romance, love, stuff like that. This is going to have moments of maximum truth, when we have to just accept whatever the physical truth is in our lives, but at the same time, this is also really, really good energy to heal the past relationships, traumas which resulted from our own families, from our parents, from our education, old education when we were children, childhood traumas, everything like that which has to do with the past and which has an emotional element to it. It is a perfect energy to heal it. Yes, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be pain free, but ultimately it can be taking off emotional shackles, especially which has to do with the past. This is where we are going to state to the universe, look, I suffered a great deal emotionally in the past. I was abused, I was manipulated, I was belittled by my partners, by my parents, by my friends, whoever. But now this is where I know I can be free, and I release the past, and I will never allow another person to do this in my life, to do this to me. So this means freedom. This means making the decision that these patterns are definitely not ever going to repeat in the future. And then on September, Pluto is going to receive a beautiful trine from the Sun in Virgo. And this is a really, really good energy, because Virgo is practical solutions. Virgo is the practicality of our minds, and that practicality shapes matter, the material world, the physical earth, so to speak. So this will be a really good aspect for scientific discoveries, scientific progress, when all the changes that we came up with intellectually can be installed, can be embodied, they can be manifested physically in order to benefit all of us, all our lives, all our physical expressions of our lives, our routines. This is when we're going to form a totally new normality, one which we might really, really enjoy, and one which might give us freedom. This is also a really beautiful aspect for compassion, for service for others, to embody whatever you wish to gift to the world, your talents, your skills, and to make relevant progress with all of these. And then later on, Mercury in the sign of Libra is going to square a conversation of tension, Pluto. And this can be a really bad aspect for communication, for diplomatic relationships, for partnerships, for one-on-one alliances. Chances are many of these are going to terminate, but they're going to free up space to attract new ones in our lives. But of course, all of this is just a general retrospective. I'm going to be talking about in great detail about all the aspects, about all of this Pluto retrograde season as we go through it. I'm going to be here to guide you each and every step of the way. So thank you so much for listening. I'm really sorry that this video is a little bit too long, but I totally believe that we need to properly understand the symbolism of a planet so that we can benefit the most from its power, from its influence. Thank you so much and wish everyone a blessed day, and may the universe empower your inner alchemist so that through this Pluto retrograde season you can use it to its greatest potential towards your highest good and advantage.